What would you say if someone is making between $50,000 to $100,000 a year and they want to break free of the system? They want to overcome the urges and desires and temptations of society where they have to show off to please people that don't care about them and they don't care about. And they want to start setting themselves up for a greater future. It's going to take time, but over 10, 20, 30 years, they could potentially have $1 million worth of investments or beyond.
Or more.
Or more. So if someone's making between $50,000 to $100,000 right now, 2024, what should they be thinking about in terms of building wealth? What's a couple of steps or a system they can put in place if they have zero financial education, if they don't even have the right beliefs, but they could start setting themselves up for 5, 10, 20 years in the future where they're going to say, wow, I'm so glad I made those few steps that Jaspreet told me to do back in the day. What would those steps be?
Well, the first thing is understanding that even if you're making 50 grand a year, you can retire a millionaire and live a life of financial freedom if you start taking action. Now, the thing that everybody likes to talk about, I'll give the end goal and then I'll show how to actually do it. Because everybody says if you invest $100 a month from age 21 to 65, you'll have over $1 million when it comes time for you to retire. Okay, how, where, when, and what do I do? So number one, understanding the numbers, the math will show you that you can become a millionaire. Now you got to dissect the how do I actually go about doing it? Because everybody says invest your money, but what does that mean?
And where do I invest it? The stock market, individual stocks, funds, real estate funds, apartments, it's crypto, gold. Like, what am I supposed to do?
So you start by not spending all of your money. A simple thing that I talked about is my 75, 15, 10 plan, which means for every dollar that I earn, 75 cents is the maximum that I can spend. 15 cents is the minimum I'm putting aside to invest. 10 cents is the minimum I'm putting aside to save. Now, the first thing everybody says when I say that is, Jaspreet, how in the world am I going to live off of 3/4 of every dollar that I earn? I'm already struggling to survive. Well, you got to make this decision right now, which is what's more important to you right now? Do you want to build your future wealth or do you want to continue having the nice things? Then everybody says, Jaspreet, I'm already living tight. Like, what do you mean? I'm already living paycheck to paycheck. Things are already tough. Well, all I can do is give you the reality. And the reality is it's going to be harder next year. It's going to be even more difficult the year after that. And it's going to get even more difficult the year after that. The path to building wealth is not that complicated. You have to have some money. You have to put this money aside for investments. If you're spending all of your money, you're never going to build wealth. And now you got to figure out, what are you going to cut out?
But Jaspreet, I've got my parents who need support. I've got family members who are struggling. I've got my friends that want to go out on the bars 3 times a week and concerts and activities. And I got to buy nice clothes for my job. And I've got to commute to work. And I've got to do all these things that cost a lot of money.
Yep.
Jaspreet, what do I do?
Where you put your focus, you're going to see the biggest results. If you want to lose weight, you got to put your exercise and your focus in the gym. You got to put your focus on your diet. If you want to advance in your career, you got to put more focus on your job and learning how to advance in your career. If you want to build more wealth, you got to put your focus on learning how to do that and changing the way you spend your money. And it's really just a matter of priorities. I used to guest teach in Detroit public schools. Obviously, our office is in Detroit, but I used to guest teach in Detroit public schools in some really rough school districts. And these kids were smart, hard workers, but many of them grew up in troubled homes. Most of the kids did not have 2 parents in a home. The vast majority of kids did not have 2 parents in a home. The vast majority of kids had no guidance or leadership. Some of the kids were already affiliated with gangs in high school because they didn't have anywhere else to go, and the gangs literally provided them food. So now when you're quote unquote
community,
yeah. when your brothers are providing you food, they're trying to take care of you. You don't think of it as a bad thing. Now, here's the interesting part. If we focus on the financial side, I came in as a guest teacher just to talk about life. And I would talk about, just general motivation and you can become successful, starting with the mindset side of things, but also getting a little bit into the financial side because the kids there wanted nice things like every other high school kid in the world does.
You want cool sneakers and clothes and whatever,
And which is no different than any other high school kid. The difference is many of these kids here were also working jobs. They were working to earn money while going to school. And so, we talked to the kids about money, like, okay, you're working to earn money. Great. What are you doing with this money? I get paid. I go to the local liquor store. I cash in my check. The liquor store owner takes 1 to 10% of the check. I buy a bunch of things and I walk out and then I have half of my paycheck left. Okay, well, what about these new Jordans that you got? Because that was a big thing in the school that I'm talking about, particularly where kids were really lining up to buy the J's, the Jordans. And I remember this so vividly because I remember kids would saying, I'm not going to eat because I want to save that $8
Wow.
so I can buy these shoes. It's a matter of priorities where, true story, some kids are prioritizing the Jordans over the food that I eat.
Wow.
And so life is really a matter of priorities now. If building wealth is really a priority, that means you're going to have to deprioritize some other things that you're spending money on. Now, this is where people get into those arguments of, does that mean I should stop buying Starbucks? Look, Starbucks is $5 a day, whatever it might
More
be.
than that now.
Whatever it is, right? Which, if you put that in a compound interest calculator, yeah, it could be worth $1 million. But now let's take a step back and look at some of the biggest purchases. The number one largest expense for most people besides taxes.
Car?
Your home,
Home.
where you live.
Yeah.
And then your car. And so now let's start with those two things. Can you live somewhere smaller and save a few $100 a month?
I say this, I've been telling people this a lot because I just told you beforehand that I bought my first home a year ago. At 40, I waited until I was 40 years old to buy a home. Now, I lived comfortable in a 2-bedroom apartment for 15 years almost, right? A 1-bedroom apartment, studio apartment, 1-bedroom apartment, 2-bedroom apartment, nice buildings eventually and paid for that. But I saved and invested money and waited till I was 40. Now I live in Los Angeles. It's a different price bracket. I wanted to wait till I had the home that I could live in for at least 10 years, that I was had everything I wanted. So it was a bigger investment, but I waited, and I let my money work for me for the last 13 years.
Yeah.
And there are sacrifices you make and pros and cons for whatever decisions you make.
Every decision.
Right?
I still rent today.
Yeah.
I own a portfolio of rental properties. I invest in stocks. I invest in startups. I run Briefs Media, my company. We have an office, an expensive office in downtown Detroit, but I also rent where I live.
Yes.
Are you going to feel bad for me because I rent?
No.
Well, I hope not. We demonize the wrong things. And I made a post on this on X or Twitter.
I think it's officially
Instagram,
X now. Yeah.
Where it was, let's stop normalizing buying BMWs in our 20s and start normalizing buying assets. Because it's very easy to demonize, oh, you're renting? You're paying somebody else's mortgage. You're making somebody else rich. Why not build your own equity? Well, let's actually dissect the financial argument here because it has good merits, right? People coming at this from a good perspective that you have to own a home to build wealth. That's what people have made the American dream, to own a home. When in reality, the American dream is the ability to build wealth. People just assume building wealth means buying a home. Who did that? Well, none other than the bankers and the realtors. I still am a licensed realtor. And one of the things they teach you when you become a realtor, especially if you're learning how to sell, is you talk to people about buying their biggest investment ever. And if you're buying your biggest investment, keyword investment ever, it's a little bit easier to get you to think about buying a little bit bigger and a little bit nicer, because now you're buying for your kids. You're buying to build a generational wealth. You're buying something that you can build equity in. But let's talk about this for a second. When you go and rent, the thing everybody says is you're going and paying a landlord's mortgage.
Yes.
When you go and buy something on Amazon, did anybody ever say you're paying Jeff Bezos' mortgage? Or whoever the other owners are, the
You're paying
CEOs?
Starbucks mortgage.
You're paying them because you are.
Yeah.
When you go and eat at a nice restaurant, did you ever think that you're paying the chef's mortgage? Because you are. When you go and get a drink from Starbucks, do you ever think that I'm paying for that barista's mortgage? Because you are. So you're getting a value. Now let's talk about, okay, well, I'm building equity in your home. Yeah, that's great. Nothing wrong with that. But banks are also smart, and they front load their mortgages. What does that mean? That means for the first, if you get a 30-year mortgage, for the first 14 and a half years out of your 30-year mortgage,
Paying interest.
the majority of your payment is going directly to interest, which means for the first year, almost all of your monthly payment is going in interest. So if I'm making $1,000 a month in my mortgage, year one, I have built essentially zero equity, because all that money I paid in year one, or almost all of it, is going directly to my banker's pockets. And it's not until year 15 that half of my mortgage payment is going to build equity. So yeah, you are building equity, but it takes a long time. And what ends up happening before year 15 is people go and refinance. And when you refinance, you're starting that process all over again. And so this is where, again, I'm not against home ownership. I think it's a great thing for the right person at the right time. Just make sure you can afford it.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, the way you build wealth is not by buying a home. The way you build wealth is not by becoming a doctor. The way you build wealth is not by becoming an NBA player. The way you build wealth is by using your money to buy investments. I called it the middleman a little bit earlier. The reason why I called it a middleman is because it's so difficult, and you really have to think of it as like a delayed process. When I make $10,000, it takes a lot of time and effort and energy to make that $10,000, right? Well, what do you want to do when you make this? You want to show it off. But instead, if I take the $10,000 and I put it in an investment, I don't see anything of it. A 10% return on $1,000 is $100. A 10% return on $10,000 is $1,000. And it might take a year to get the 10% return. It could take 2 years. Well, if you keep doing that, though, what you'll start to realize is that a 10% return on $100,000 is $10,000. And a 10% return on $1 million is $100,000. Right? It takes time to grow and build, but you got to get started. It starts with one, right? People say, oh, I can't see any real returns, real money until I invest $1 million. Well, the way you get to that $1 million is you start with one.
Yes.
Right? You're from Ohio, right? In the Midwest, it gets cold during the winter times. Okay. Detroit's a little better than Ohio, but what happens is when the wintertime comes and you want to build a snowman, you start with a small snowball. It's this big. Okay. You put it on the ground. And if you want to build a snowman, you start to roll it. In the beginning, you're not seeing any growth. That snowball stays small. But if you keep rolling, you stick with it, you keep rolling, it starts to get a little bigger. And then a little while by, it goes a little bigger. And then once it gets bigger, every time you turn the snowball, it gets a lot bigger, a lot quicker.
Yeah.
Because there's so much more surface area. And that's what you're doing when you're investing your money, is you are working to build. The beginning part sucks. There's no way around it. You got to start by spending less money. You got to start by investing your money. And you see no returns because the markets might be going up. They might be going down.
You might lose money.
You might be seeing I mean, that's a part of the process. And you're like, what? I'm investing my money for 6 months and I haven't seen, where are my millions of dollars, right? But you got to stay consistent. The beginning part sucks and it's tough and it's not attractive, but you got to keep going. And that's why people get so attracted to, how can I get rich quicker, right? The next meme stock, the next hot crypto. I'm not saying all Bitcoin or blockchain is bad, but you get caught into this, how can I 10x my money in 10 months? How can I double my money in 10 months? How can I get this quick outcome? Which ends up becoming gambling, which is why most people who do that end up losing their money.